Amara Thompson was only 10 years old, but the weight she carried felt far beyond her years. Living in the small, deeply conservative town of Ash Hollow, she was the only Black girl in her class, a fact that never let her forget she was different. The other children didn't just ignore her, they avoided her. Their parents whispered behind closed doors, urging them not to play with that girl. Amara's mother, Denise, did her best to shield her daughter from the town's ugliness. Denise worked double shifts as a waitress, her smile weary but determined. Amara's father had left years ago, and though her mother tried to fill the void, there were nights when Amara cried herself to sleep, wishing for someone who could tell her she wasn't alone. One day after school, Amara wandered into the woods behind their house, seeking the solace only the trees seemed to offer. Here, she didn't feel watched or judged. Here, the whispers stopped. As the sunlight filtered through the tall pines, she felt a calm she never knew existed. But on this particular day, the forest was silent, eerily so. That's when she heard it, a low, pained whimper. Following the sound, Amara came upon a sight that made her heart stop, a black wolf caught in a rusty trap. Its fur was matted, its amber eyes wild with pain and fear. Amara hesitated for only a moment before stepping closer. Amara's hands trembled as she knelt beside the injured animal. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice shook. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf growled low in its throat, but its eyes held something more than fear, an awareness that startled Amara. She used a stick to pry the trap open, careful not to startle the animal. When the metal finally gave way, the wolf bolted a few feet before turning to face her. It didn't run further. Instead, it stared, as if studying her. Amara felt a strange connection, a silent understanding passing between them. From that day on, the wolf appeared near the edge of the forest every afternoon. Amara began calling it Shadow for its dark, sleek fur and the way it moved soundlessly through the trees. She would bring scraps of food, sitting with it for hours as she shared her thoughts and secrets. Shadow became her only friend, a bond unlike anything she had ever known. But the world outside their forest sanctuary was unkind. One day, as she returned home, she overheard neighbors gossiping on their porch. "That girl's always running off alone," one said. Just like her father, Trouble. Amara clenched her fists, swallowing the tears that threatened to spill. Shadow, as if sensing her sorrow, appeared at her side that evening. Sitting under the vast canopy of stars, she whispered, "I don't know why they hate me, but they can't take you away." Shadow pressed its nose to her hand, its warmth a silent promise. A week later, the town gathered for a funeral at St. Mary's Church. The boy being mourned was only 12, taken too soon by illness. Amara attended with her mother, sitting in the back where the whispers couldn't reach them as harshly. The ceremony was somber, the air heavy with grief. Just as the priest began his eulogy, the church doors burst open. A gust of wind rushed in, carrying with it a figure that made everyone freeze. Shadow stepped into the room. Gasps echoed through the church as the wolf walked down the aisle, its amber eyes scanning the room before stopping at the boy's coffin. With the grace of a spirit, it leapt onto the wooden surface and lay down, its head resting gently near the boy's clasped hands. No one dared move. Some whispered of bad omens, others clutched their rosaries. But Amara stood, her voice breaking the stunned silence. "Shadow," she called. The wolf turned its head toward her, its gaze soft. Slowly, it leapt down and walked back to her side. The moment they left, the whispers turned to shouts. "It's her fault," someone cried. "That animal is unnatural, just like her." Amara's mother grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the angry crowd. That night, Amara sat in her room, tears streaming down her face as Shadow lay at her feet, offering silent comfort. Amara's world turned upside down after the church incident. The townsfolk's suspicions of her grew, and even her classmates stared at her with open hostility. But Shadow remained by her side, their bond stronger than ever. One evening, unable to bear the weight of the whispers, Amara escaped to the woods. Shadow led her deeper than she had ever ventured before, their silent connection guiding her steps. They arrived at a clearing bathed in silver moonlight. At its center stood a statue of a young boy, carved in stone but weathered by time. Shadow circled the statue, its amber eyes glowing as it pawed at the ground near its base. Amara followed, kneeling where the wolf dug, uncovering a small, rusted locket. Opening it, she found a faded photograph of a boy who looked just like the statue, and startlingly, the boy whose funeral had just taken place. Confusion swirled in her mind as she turned to Shadow, who let out a low, mournful howl. That night, Amara dreamt of a forest much older than Ash Hollow, where wolves and people moved in harmony. In her dream, a boy with amber eyes whispered, "The town's secrets run deep. You have to see what they're hiding." When she woke, the locket was still in her hand. Amara couldn't shake the dream. Determined to uncover the truth, she visited the town library the next day. Old newspaper archives told a chilling story. Decades ago, a boy named Isaac had vanished during a forest fire, and his wolf companion was said to have died protecting him. The locket belonged to him, but there was more. The articles hinted at strange rituals held in the forest, and accusations of witchcraft had driven Isaac's family to the edges of society, much like Amara's current isolation. As she read, Shadow sat beside her, its presence strangely comforting in the sterile library. When Amara whispered, "What do I do now?" the wolf nudged her hand, as if urging her to follow the trail. That evening, Amara showed her mother the locket and the articles. Her mother's face grew pale as she recognized the boy in the photograph. "Isaac, he was your great-uncle," Denise revealed, her voice trembling. "I never told you because I didn't want this town's hatred to define you the way it did him." But it wasn't just hatred. The forest fire had been no accident. It had been set by townsfolk who feared Isaac's connection to the wolves. Shadow growled low, as if sensing danger even in the retelling of the story. Amara and Shadow returned to the clearing one final time. She now understood the truth. Shadow was more than a wolf. It was a guardian, bound to her family for generations, waiting for the moment when someone brave enough could uncover the truth and heal the rift between the town and the forest. As they approached the statue, the ground trembled, and the air filled with an electric hum. The locket in Amara's hand grew warm, and Shadow's form shimmered, its edges blurring as though it were stepping between worlds. The townspeople, curious and wary, followed the pair into the forest. Amara turned to face them, holding the locket high. "This forest doesn't belong to fear and hatred," she declared, her voice steady. "It's a place of protection, of harmony. And it's time we remember that." Light erupted from the clearing as Shadow transformed. Its form expanded, glowing with radiant energy as it became a bridge between past and present, human and wild. The townsfolk watched, their hostility melting into awe as memories of their ancestors' bonds with the forest filled their minds. In that moment, Amara and Shadow became symbols of unity. The town, once divided by fear, began to heal. And though the whispers didn't vanish overnight, they softened, replaced by curiosity and, slowly, respect. Amara stood in the clearing, Shadow beside her, knowing their journey had only just begun.